We're getting settled. If you could go to the Book of Esther, that's on page 581. The Book of Esther. And if you're looking for that, you can find it right after Nehemiah and Ezra and those books. And there is Now, many of you are aware of the feasts of the Lord, right? How many feasts of the Lord are there, the primary feasts of the Lord that are mentioned in Leviticus 23? How many feasts of the Lord are there? This is going to be like a teaching seminar, okay? Teaching seminar. I've taught this for 10 years, that's all. So we just need to know how many feasts of the Lord there are in Leviticus 23. There are 7. God's number, right? There are 7. They begin with Passover and they end with Tabernacles and everything in between, Pentecost and all of those, right? And trumpets, all of that. Now, there are a couple other minor feasts, but they're important feasts. At Christmas time, we have, what Jewish feast is there at Christmas time? It's Hanukkah, right? And that's the celebration of an event that took place between the Gospels. There's the intertestament period, 400 years, and that is when the temple was defiled under a Greek leader, and there was no oil left, and then there was a rebellion, and the city was recaptured under the Maccabees, and you have to have 8 days of purification before you can begin the sacrificial system. They only had enough oil for one, and they put the oil in the menorah, and it lasted for the entire time, supernatural. So that's why you see the 8 branches of the menorah, and they're lit every day for Hanukkah. Now there's another feast. It's called the Feast of Purim. Feast of Purim, and you'll see on the screen the miracle. We'll call it the miracle breakthrough. And this book is a book of an incredible miracle that took place about 40 years after Nehemiah built the wall. Right, so that and the Persians were in charge at that time, and the Jewish people, many of them were still back or still in Persia. Only 50,000 of the million or so that were brought there went back to rebuild the temple, Solomon's temple. And so this is under Persia. The king is Ahasuerus, or also Xerxes, or Artaxerxes. He has different names, different writings. They've already uncovered archaeological digs where they found that this was an actual Persian king. And the Jews are still in captivity. And it's, people have settled in, basically. And out of that came what we're commonly known as the Samaritans, because there was a lot of interbreeding between cultures. Persians, or Arabs would be, and the Jewish people. They became the Samaritans, which were despised, and they were in the northern kingdom. And then there's several characters in this that you might be familiar with. Of course, there's Esther. And there is her uncle, basically, Modecai, and there is a guy called Haman, and it's a drama, I suppose, but it's the real deal. This really happened, and every year this feast is celebrated, and it's the feast where there's the most joy. It's a feast of joy. They just are, and if you go online and you dial up Purim. The Feast of Purim, and you get images. You will see in Israel, what you find is it's like Mardi Gras. They have all these costumes on, and the big thing about that is, and they have some of the rabbis even said this, that you get drunk enough that you can't tell the difference between Esther's victory and Haman's hatred, or something like that. Because Artaxerxes, or Xerxes, or Ahasuerus, the king, got drunk in one of the things. Anyway, that's what came out of it. And it's like Mardi Gras. They have all these weird outfits, and it's a time where you have a lot of like the gay pride parades come out, and the people dressed with the rainbow, and they're scantily dressed, and that's what it's become. That is now the Feast of Purim. It should be something quite different, but if you look at the pictures, that's what's taking place when it takes place. So we're going to go through the chapters, a little highlight of each chapter, and we're going to try to draw from this some application to the times that we're living in. In other words, how does it apply to us? How come it wound up in the Bible? Have you read Esther lately? And a lot of people don't read Esther or a lot of the other. This is the last of the books in the Bible that are called history. They're called history. Then you go into the minor prophets. So this is one of the history books. Before that is Nehemiah. There's Ezra and other books that Chronicles that give the history of the nation. And this is pretty cool. At the end of this book, it says, and they Mordecai establishes the Feast of Purim. Purim, and we'll see where that comes from in a few moments. So we ask, Lord, would you bless the teaching of the word this morning? Amen. So it came to pass, verse 1, that in the days of Ahasuerus, who was the king, and he ruled over, from down in Ethiopia up through India, a big chunk of territory. And he was, it was a great king. So what he did is he had now things had settled down, he's victorious, he's got all of this land he has, now it's time to party. So they have a party. How long does it last? 180 days. That's how long it lasts. 180, it's like half a year. It's a party, and they're partying on. And at the end of that party, they have a very unique, a local celebration at the end of the 180 days, and here's the people from the town, Shushan, which is where the capital was, and he's in the capital. He said, well, I'm going to have a special 7-day thing going on here, and it's going to be a great, more drinking, and he is, you'll see in a moment, he is filled with wine, and he's drunk, basically. That's how the Bible says he's drunk. And Vashti, the queen, in verse 9, you see Vashti is his queen, and she's stunning. And he asked her to come out and dance for his guests. That's all he asked. He said, come on out and do a dance. And I want to show, see, this is all about showing off, because the kings had to show how much you had and how great you were, and you had the prettiest girl and all of that. So he said, come on out, and I want you to dance for my guests. And usually you put on something that was, provocative, and you did a dance. Well, Vashti, not particularly a believer, but she was, she had a sense, I'm not going to parade myself out there for all your lustful friends there, and I'm not going to be a spectacle. So she says she is not going to do it. Verse 11, it says, bring Vashti the queen before the king with the crown royal, and to show the people and the princes her beauty, for she was a good looker. She was fair to look at. And that means she had a very beautiful form and figure. All right, she was a nice figure, and she was a beautiful girl. But the queen, Vashti, refused to come at the king's commandment, and by his chamberlains. Therefore was the king very angry, and his anger burned within him. And so he gets some counselors come in, and they go, what? When you're the king, guess what? Back in the day, whatever you said, that's what you did. And if you refuse that, you could wind up losing your life. You couldn't come to the king's presence without being asked. If you just walked in, most of the time they take you out and kill you. So he has some counselors, and they said, look, you can't let this thing pass. And the reason is that if you let this pass, and everybody finds out about this, because there's always leaks up at the Capitol, there's always leaks, that your wife did not obey you. This is going to change the culture, and the men, the women in the land, in this Persian territory, are going to begin to despise their husbands, and they're not going to obey. Now, we do know that as believers, that women are to be loved by their husband with an enduring and sacrificial love, and women are to submit to the leadership of their husbands, and that's quite correct. But in this context, it was just a practical matter that men ruled, and not in a godly way, but you did what the boss said. And today, having been in Saudi Arabia a number of times, and my family lived there, that's how it still is. Persia was modern day Iran, right? You have Arabs and you have Persians, a little bit different. And they are like, the men own their wives, and they do what they're supposed to do when they have their clothing and their garb, their, what do you call the burqas and all of that, and they have to wear whatever the husband says you wear. And some of them can, they have a place to look out for their eyes, and they're all in black, they're all covered, but some of them have to wear gloves. The husband said, no, you wear gloves too. I don't want those men lusting over your hands. And you need to wear black shoes. Whatever they say, they do it. So that's carried on over these many centuries. And they said, that's what you're going to do. So what you're going to do, you're going to dump Vashti. Now, nobody knows really what happened to her. Some think that she was heard of no more, but others that she just disappeared. We don't know what, doesn't give that. And but he said, what we're going to do is we're going to have a beauty contest here, and we're going to get you another queen. But the folks out there in the hinterlands, they're going to know that you didn't tolerate that stuff from your wife, not listening to you and dancing when you told her to dance. So you're going to get another queen. So the beauty contest ensues, and there you go all throughout the land, and they're looking for the pretty girls all over this area. And verse 5 of chapter 2 talks about in Shushan, the palace there, was a Jew whose name was Mordecai. Verse 6, been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity, and under Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, and Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried them away, and he verse 7, brought up Hadassah. Now Hadassah is her Hebrew name, but Esther was the name given to her. It really means Venus, like the goddess Venus, the love goddess. And Esther, who was his uncle's daughter, the cousin. And she had neither father nor mother, and the girl was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took her under his leadership, raised her. Well, they go all around the city, and they're finding the beautiful girls, and they find old Esther, and she's a looker, and they bring her up to be part of the beauty contest, and potentially to be the queen. And we all are pretty aware of that part of the story. Now, down in verse 10, it says, Esther had not showed her people nor her kindred, for Mordecai had charged her that she should not show it. In other words, she didn't say she was Jewish, and that she was part of those who had been carried away into captivity. So for 12 months, they prepare the girls. 12 months, they're getting the whole treatment, and purifications and myrrh, and for 6 months they do the myrrh, for 6 months the sweet odors and purifying of the women. Now they do that for a couple of reasons. Number one, there was a lot of beauty treatments back then to make the girls look pretty and to smell nice. And also they wanted to wait 12 months because they didn't know if any of these girls might be what? With child. So they didn't want to find out you got the queen and she has a child already, and that would be the heir. So they had to wait 12 months. And so every one of these girls is getting prepared. And down in verse 15, the turn of Esther came. And by the way, Mordecai is a very influential leader, and it says he is at the king's gate. Now, when you're at the king's gate, that was a place of administration. He had an important post in Persia, just like Daniel. They were brought up, and they were smart guys, and they were good administrators, rulers, smart guys, had a lot of wisdom. So that's what he was. He was at the king's gate. Whenever you see the king's gate, the gate is always a place of power, and that's where he would, dispense his wisdom and guidance and whatever it was. So at the end of that, verse 15, it says, "And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all them that looked upon her." There was a guy that was Haggai, I guess you pronounce it like that. He was a eunuch, and he was the head of all of the girls. Now, a eunuch is a person who has certain modifications to their anatomy, and they're not after the girls. So that's what he would do. And he liked her a lot. She just got favor. Now, there's something about the favor of the Lord in this. That's one of the subjects where you get the favor of the Lord gets upon a person who is in competition. Could be a number of things, but God gave favor, and the reason he gave the favor is because there was a plan. See, God's in this whole thing, obviously, where he sees the end from the beginning, and there's something in the future here that is going to evolve, and God is in the midst of it, even though throughout this, a lot of it looks pretty gloomy, but he's setting things in place. Now, you can apply that to a degree. We'll see to apply that to where we are in the nation, and where things are today, and what our impressions are on that. And we see, we have believed that a lot of the things that have taken place were unjust, illegitimate, illegal, and now it is what it is, and say, okay, now what? You know, that's a big question that one of the great men always said, forget his name, would always say that, but he always say, yeah, oh, that's very nice. Oh yeah, that's a good, yeah, that's good. Yeah, what? And at the end of it, it would be, well, now what? Given that principle that you've said. And so that's where we are today. So, well, now what? And in this story, you say, well, God was doing something all along, and you didn't really see it all until it unfolded. And verse 17 says, and the king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the other virgins, so that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen. And, okay, Queen Esther. You know, so we've got Queen Esther. Don't put her up there. Wait until that one. That comes a little bit later. But that was a good guess. That was a good guess. But because she is going to appear a little bit later before the king for a very important thing. So, but here's a little bit of a clip here on this story. It's very dramatic. Down at the bottom or the end of this chapter, verse 21, in those days while Mordecai sat in the king's gate. Now, that's all the important people there, political people. Two of the king's chamberlains, those are guys who work in the king's court. Bigthan, and Teresh, of those which kept the door, were angry and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. In other words, lay hands on him means they were going to assassinate him, basically. And the thing was known to Mordecai, who told it to Esther, the queen now, and Esther certified the king thereof in Mordecai's name. In other words, she went there and said, my uncle, Mordecai, has discovered this plot against you to kill you, and I certify that it's true. Now that clip, hold on to that. And when they inquired of it, the inquisition was made of the matter, it was found out. Therefore they were both, boom, hanged on a tree, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles before the king. Now remember that. It's written in the book of the Chronicles of the king. Now we have in our Bibles, 1st and 2nd, what? Chronicles, and that's the Chronicles, which is the history of, same thing, the history of Israel. Well, that was the history of Persia. And they write it down, and they kept records. Now another guy shows up. His name is Haman, or Haman. I would rather call it, just Haman. And they tell where he's from. He was from a group who were anti-Semitic. He hated the Jews. He was out of that lineage. If you look through the lineage, and the king advances him in verse 1 and set his seat above all the princes that were with him. Now this guy is in the government. He's a government guy, and he works his way. He's a slick guy, and he's working his way past this one and stepping on that one, and he finally works his way politically to the top, just under the king, and the king is not maybe that smart, and he gives this guy that authority. And watch what happens. And all the king's servants that were in the king's gate bowed and gave reference to Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai, not bowing down, and is not doing reverence. He's not doing it. Now, that says something to us. Now, first of all, when this story is told every Purim, and by the way, I didn't mention this, it is this weekend. It's the Thursday, Friday, 24th, 25th. It's the certain day in the month Adar. It's the 13th day and the 14th day of the Jewish month of Adar. But it comes for us, and we have the solar calendar, not the lunar one. So it is February this year, I think 24th, 25th. Right? And you'll see why that is in a moment. When they tell the story, whenever they say Haman, everybody hisses. Sss, boo, sss, hiss, boo. And the kids are sitting around the table, and that's what they do. And it's kind of a funny thing. Or they get a whole family together, and they're having a party. It is a celebration of joy, right? And Mordecai says, I'm not bowing down to this guy. Now that says something to us. It says, no, we're not going to submit to unrighteousness or wickedness, or to those who do not have a moral character. So it's a principle. We don't submit to unrighteousness. I mean, there may be a person in an office that we may not know too much about, and we honor we pray for the leaders, and we're to a degree we can do that. But not when it comes to knowing someone, or especially someone who is ungodly and demanding us to bow down and do the reverence things. And nope, not going to do reverence. That's in a sense a form of idolatry and worship of a personality, and demanding it. And we could say that, no, I'm not going to reverence. I don't give reverence to a man. Reverence means to worship and be in fear of. But this guy was very insecure. He said, I want everybody bowing down to me. Now I've got the power. You know, I got the scepter. Not quite the scepter, and he wants everybody honoring him. And that's this. And you find this a lot of times in politics. They want to be given a title. There was an occasion where there was in the Congress, they were having hearings, and they had a military man there, and the woman was a woman I may have been the Senate, and he kept saying, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. And you know, she stopped and she said, not ma'am, that's Senator so-and-so. Yes, Senator. And she said, it took me a long time to get this job, and I demand that you honor me with Senator. See, it's the same spirit. It's that arrogant, self-centered life. Mordecai said he's not doing it, and it makes this guy, Mordecai is now mortified. I'm sorry, Haman is mortified and angry with this, that he will not bow down. And they're asking, why will he not bow down? Verse 5, and when Haman saw that Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence, then was Haman full of anger. Now this is the emotion that has been driving the political realm in this country for some time. It's the anger that you don't bow down. And those that are in politics, they want to get to the top so they can command you to do something. It's about having dominion over you and getting you to do what we tell you to do. And you know, the big mask controversy now. It's the mask, and some people want to wear masks, and that's fine if they feel that's fine. And if you don't, that's fine too. When you cross the line is when the government demands that you do it. See, that's a different issue right there. And that is oftentimes, and you see a lot of the states where some of these governors, they get that in that position, and they make edicts to control the people. You know, you got to close your restaurant, but the abortion clinic can be open, but you got to close this. You can't go to the workout center, but you can, you know, the bars are open, and they just make edicts. And they're called, in some cases, presidential proclamations. And you just start saying things and doing it because you have the what? You got the power, okay? So and Haman is full of wrath in verse 6, and he thought, King James, he thought scorn to lay hands on Mordecai, but not him alone. For they had showed him the people of Mordecai, the Jews, wherefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews throughout the whole kingdom. And see, he's an anti-Semitic. Verse 7, and the month that is the month of Nisan is the 12th year of King Ahasuerus. They cast Pur. Now we get our word Purim from that word Pur, which is also a lot. It's like throwing dice. And from that day to that day and from month to month, to the 12th month, that is the month of Adar. And then it was the 13th day that they chose. And that what they chose to do this, they gave the people of that region or that nation the permission to go in and destroy all the Jews and also take their stuff. And in these next several verses here, it says that Haman said, I'm going to place in the treasury 10,000 talents of silver. I'm going to take it from the Jews, and it's my payment. It's like a bribe almost. He said, if I can just kill all of these people. But he thinks, the king thinks, he's just talking about some people, maybe a little group of terrorists that are in the town. Most people think that he never considered that he was going to kill all the Jews all throughout this region, but he had a little group of terrorists that he was going to go after, and the king is saying, yeah, go get those guys, you know, they're a bunch of terrorists. But Haman's got this plan to kill them. Who are they? They are God's chosen. They're God's people. This is a plot by the devil, and Haman is the chosen one to destroy God's people. Now we can apply that today and say there are forces within even this nation that are anti-Christian. They were anti-Semitic there. They are anti-Christian, or they're out of the spirit of Antichrist. Same thing. And they hate Christians. Christians are persecuted more, and the persecution is increasing all throughout the nations. If you run the numbers, there's been more people killed in persecution, I think, in the last year or so than all of from the beginning of time. So that is increasing. So that, in other words, the devil hates God's people, and he puts people oftentimes in power, and those people in power then persecute the people of God. And that's what's happening here. And we know that's going to happen in the end times. There's going to be great persecution, but obviously God is going to intervene and take care of the modern day Hamans. And so verse 10 says, and the king took his ring from his hand and gave it unto Haman. And the king said in verse 11 unto Haman, the silver is given to thee. He says, keep it, don't worry about it. The people also do with him as seemeth good to thee. And so he's got the king's ring. Well, once you got the ring, now what you do is you have a proclamation, you fold it over, you put the wax on it, you make the king's seal, and you can do pretty much whatever you want if you got the king's seal. And that's what Haman has, that kind of power. And the letters, verse 13, was sent to all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, children, women, in one day, even upon the 13th day of the 12th month, is the month of Adar, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. Oh, I said, oh, this is a winner. All throughout, from Ethiopia to India, these letters are going out. And this is a day they can go out and kill these people and take all their stuff. How many know you're going to get a lot on board with that kind of a promise? So, chapter 4, Mordecai hears about this, and it says he rent his clothes, verse 1, and put on sackcloth. And there was great mourning in verse 3, and there's fasting and weeping and wailing. Okay, now something's happened here. First of all, Mordecai is mortified because he realizes that this is all happening because of who? Because of him, because he would not bow down. And for the anger of Haman, boo, because of Haman, now he has sent out this proclamation to kill all the Jews. So he is grieved in his heart. And the people find out about this. The word is out, and that word would get out fast. And they start weeping and fasting. Now, we would presume that they are also praying. It doesn't say praying whenever you go through. But when you're fasting and you're Jews, you just know that they're also praying because their lives are on the line. And this is what happens in a culture. When you see wickedness emerging, it causes the people to fast and pray. And that's what we are even now doing as we see the darkness kind of becoming greater, the darkness going darker, and the people that are in power are not promoting righteousness and supporting the believers, right? And so he calls Esther, and Esther tells her about what's going on, and I'll just summarize it, and said, Esther, what you're going to do is you're going to go into see the king, and just go in there, and we want you to address this whole matter. and it's because of its implications. And she says, and give him, this guy, a writing of the decree, because he doesn't even know all that's going on. He doesn't even see the whole picture. He thinks you're just going to go get a whole bunch of people locally, but he said this is throughout the region, throughout the kingdom. And she says, if I go into him and unannounced, and she's not even been in there. 30 days has gone by since she was made king. She's not even been in to see him. And she says, if I go in with him, I could be dead. And that's the request is made in verse 8, and then verse 11. The king's servant and all the people of the king provinces do know that whoever, whether man or woman, shall come unto the king, unto the inner court, who is not called, there is one law of his to put him to death, except such to whom the king hold out the golden scepter, and that he may live. But I have not been called to come unto the king for these 30 days. He said, I'm the king, the queen, and I've not even been called in. And Mordecai says, well, here's the deal. If you don't go in, you're a dead girl anyway, because you're going to be found out that you're a Jew, which the king doesn't even know, and that's going to be the end of you. And he also goes on to say, and if salvation doesn't come through you, God will make another way to deal with this whole situation, but you have the opportunity. And down at the last part of verse 14, we'll read the whole thing, and Mordecai says this to her and communicates it to her through a messenger. And we know this very well. And who knows whether thou art come to the kingdom for what? Such a time as this. Now we know that phrase. In other words, you and I, and some in a larger sense, they have a calling on their life to do something for God. That's the message here. That we were born now. This is the time that God put us on the planet, and there's something that you can do for God. You have an assignment. And the question is, do you know what the assignment is? Because you and I, we've been born for such a time as this. We are to be active in the things of God and know what that assignment is. It may be a small one. It may be just for a short period of time, or it may be a larger one. In this case, it was the queen. God raised her up and set her in that palace for such a time as this. And that's what Mordecai, who's he's a smart Jewish guy. He's a leader. He said, this may be your moment, young lady. And she's a young girl. And verse 16, and he said, send this message back to Mordecai. Verse 16. Go gather then, he said, I'm going, but here's what you got to do. Go gather all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also, my maidens, will fast likewise, and so will I go in unto the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I said, if I'm dead, I'm dead. He said, but this is God, this is my opportunity. It's like the founding fathers. They said, we devote our life, our treasure, our sacred honor. Said, whatever happens. If the revolution failed, they're all hanging on the gallows. And that's the degree to which we commit ourselves to the things of God. You say, sometimes it's going to be, wow, it's like, whoa, that's a tough call right there. This may not work out well. Are you called to do it? Yeah, I really feel I'm called to do it. Okay, go and do it. Go do it, for you've been born for such a time as this. And it's not just about you, and in this case being the queen, and wow, I'm the queen. No, there's something greater in this. It's the people of God. And that's what she had to come to grips with and make that commitment to do. And I'll just go through this real quickly. Well, let me just say this before we do that, because there's 2 banquets are coming up, and we'll talk about them. Verse 2 of chapter 5. And it was so, when the king saw Esther the queen standing at the court, that she obtained favor in his sight, and the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. And the king says, what is your request? Verse 3, and it shall given thee to the half of the kingdom. Now that's a metaphor. It didn't mean actually the half of the kingdom, but it's a way that they said, I'll give you what you want. It was said, I'm going to be very gracious to you. Not that she was going to give the queen half of that kingdom. And so she comes, and she's a beauty, and he's got his scepter, and he holds it. You can see the picture. This all really happened. They have all they've done all of the archaeology on this, and they found, the remnants of this this man and this king. And it holds out, and she touches it, and he's going to spare her life. And she comes up with a plan. And first it says, get a Haman, and I want to have a feast for you, Haman and you, and we're going to have a little banquet. And they have the little banquet, and nothing much happens there. And he said, well, what is it that you want? Because, and I don't know if she kind of backs out on it. She goes, oh, boy, this is really scary. And he said, well, give me another banquet. And she has a second banquet. And she says, I'm going to tell you what I want at the second banquet. And there's a second banquet that takes place. And down in verse 8 and 9 there, after the second banquet, or before the second banquet takes place, after the first one basically, Haman leaves that, and he goes to the king's gate, and he stood up, and he didn't bow down. Mordecai didn't bow down, and he was full of indignation against Mordecai. So Mordecai goes home and talks to his wife, who is Zeresh, in verse 14. And they're talking, and some friends. He said, what am I going to do with this guy Mordecai? And he says, well, what you need to do is build a gallows that's 50 cubits high. 50 cubits high. Now, this, you say, well, how high is that? That's 75 feet, folks. There it is. The best picture I could get. He's going to hang the guy. In other words, he wants everybody to see Mordecai, his indignation and his wrath. This is what happens with political people, folks. When you won't bow down, in other words, you're going to pay a price. We'll see that happening in our culture today. You're going to get canceled. You're going to be taken off of this Twitter, that Facebook, because we're going to hang you. That's what we're going to do. We're going to demean you. It's going to be character assassination, but you're going to pay a price if you do not bow down and reverence me, and I am the authority here in this political office. That's the picture that you're seeing here. And he said, and I want to make it broadly known, because when you see this guy hang, the rest of you are going to get the message when I come through town with my ring and my horse. You're going to all fall on your faces before me. And that's the wickedness of the heart of man. So it's a good plan. That's what he's going to do. And then chapter 6. On that night, this is between banquets, Mordecai's sleeping, and he has a dream. And he couldn't sleep. And he says, well, I need to get to sleep. Will you read something to me? So what's he read? He reads the Chronicles to him. Verse 1. He commanded to bring the book of the records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had told of these two guys that were the chambermaids that were going to kill him. And the king said, what honor and dignity, in verse 3, have there been done to Mordecai for this? And the king's servant says, nope, didn't do a thing for him. Then the king said, who is in the court? Now Haman was come into the outward court of the king's house to speak to the king, to hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. So that's what he's going to do. He's going to get him hung. And the king's servant said unto him, behold, Haman stands outside of the court. And the king said, let him come in. So Haman came in, and the king said to him, what shall be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor? Now Haman thought in his heart, to whom would the king delight more than myself? Notice the arrogance. And Haman answered and says this, verse 8, let the royal apparel be brought, which the king used to wear. This is purple and white. It's beautiful stuff. And get the big horse that the king rides on, the king's apparel and the king's horse, and the crown royal which is set upon his head. And this apparel and the horse delivered unto the king, and they got it. And they bring him And when the king delighteth to honor and bring him on horseback through the street of the city, proclaim before him, thus shall it be done. Verse 10, and the king said to Haman, make haste and take the apparel and the horse and all this stuff and give it to Mordecai. And Haman is about to faint. Now, this is the old flipperooski here. You know, this is where the whole thing begins to turn. Because it's God's plan. God's doing something in this. He said, yeah, you're in a position and you're doing all this stuff, but I've got my woman in the court. And she is a woman of faith. She knows how to get people to fast and pray. I mean, she said, get everybody to fast because this is really a serious political intrigue in the palace. And Haman is the guy that the devil is using to destroy God's people. You see the picture. And the king says, give it to Mordecai the Jew that sitteth at the king's gate. Let nothing fail of all that thou hast spoken. So it's Haman who comes up with the plan of how to honor this guy, thinking it's all going to be for him. And he does the flipperooski on him, and it's his avowed enemy. All right, so down in chapter 7. So the king and Haman came to the banquet. Now this is still going on with the queen. And in verse 3, he asks you, what do you want? And in verse 2, then he goes, O king, if it please the king, let my life be given me at my position and my people at my request. So now she reveals that she's Jewish, I think, at that moment. And all of her people are Jews. And he has seen now what Haman's plan was to kill them all. Not just a little group of terrorists from his view, but to kill them all. Verse 4, for we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed and to be slain and to perish. And King Ahasuerus answered and said unto Queen Esther in verse 5, who is he and where is he that would presume in his heart to do this? And Esther said, the adversary, notice the word, when we talk about the devil, Satan, one of his names is the adversary, and the enemy, and who is wicked, it is the guy sitting right here, which is Haman. Then Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. And for some reason in verse 8, the whole thing is getting weird, and Haman, Haman falls on the bed where Esther was. Now there's no explanation of that, but he falls on Esther's in her queen bed, and he falls on the bed. And then said the king, will he force the queen also before me in the house? So why he does this is a question mark, but he thinks he's after the queen now. And Habath, one of the chamberlains, said before the king, behold also the gallows, as the king's word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face, put a bag over his head, I think. And Harbanath, one of the chamberlains, said before the king, hey, there's a gallows that's 75 foot high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who had spoken good for the king. He's the guy that saved your life. And the king said, hang Haman on those same gallows. And there's the best picture I could put up there. And he is hung, as we say, he was hung on high. He was hung on high. Chapter 8, the king gives Haman's house, which is probably a really nice place, gives it to Mordecai and to Esther. And what the queen asked of them, he said, to nullify the decree. But in Persia, in those kingdoms, once you make a decree, it's a decree. You can't not make it a decree. You can't undecree it. So she comes up with a plan. She said, well, here's what you're going to do. Have another decree, and in that decree it says that the Jews can defend themselves against their enemies and the people that would come against them. So that's what takes place. The Jews arm themselves, and in the battle on one day, it is Adar the 13th. There is a conflict, and the Jews prevail, and they're in that battle, the Jews can fight. When it comes to fighting, as you know, over the recent history, even when they're outnumbered, and they prevail on that day, and no man could withstand them, the Jews. And it also says that many, look at chapter 8, verse 17. This is interesting, Because as this thing is flipping around and God is bringing justice, and many of the people of the land became what? Now I'm in chapter 8 and I'm at verse 17. And you'll see it at the end of that verse. It says, and many of the people of the land became Jews. So we could say, you know, as this thing unfolds here, there could be some moments that take place where you're not going to expect it. And God's got some people in place. And things are going to turn around. They're going to turn around. And many people are going to get saved because of it. Are you with me on that? I'm looking for the application here. Why did they put the book in here? Why did God put this book? Matter of fact, this book was only last minute put in the canon because it did not mention God's name, and it didn't mention that. It didn't even mention prayer. So they said, well, and that was one of the criteria. But it was so implicit in the story that they included it. So now here we are. You know, we would say we're on the wrong side of the equation here, and everything's turning against us, and there's persecution against the church. But God has a plan. And He's going to bring that plan about at a point. And through it, the plan of God is to see people saved. Can you say amen? And that is what took place. And the Jews, they took care of their enemies. And eventually they got Haman's 10 sons. He got 10 sons. They hung them all. They just hung them all up there. And they said, this is a day of gladness and feasting, verse 17 of chapter 9. And Mordecai in verse 20 writes all the things down. In verse 21 of the chapter says, to establish this among them that they should keep the 14th day of the month of Adar and the 15th day of the same year, and do it yearly. Verse 26, wherefore they call these days Purim, after the name of Pur. So Pur, which means lot or throwing the dice, and he said, we're going to name that thing Purim. And that's the story. It is, talk about palace intrigue, and there's a drama in this, and it's, make a good movie. So there it is. Now, I never thought about how, when they said that they're going to make a 5 cubits high gallows for this guy, that it was actually big as one of my pine trees in front of my house. 75 feet high? You got to be kidding me. That's a statement. It's like Joseph. Remember Old Testament Joseph? He said these when he talked to his brothers. He said, you wanted to do this for evil, but God is going to bring it about to be what? Good. So you wanted to evil. He said, God's going to bring this out to be good. So we see God doing that. He just turns things around in an unexpected way. Well, how was he going to do that? Well, Joseph had to go down. He had to be, throw him in the pit. Then he's sold to the Midianites. He goes down. He's falsely accused in Potiphar's house. He goes to jail. So, well, this is not going to work out very well. Until there's the flipperooski right there. He goes, okay, here's what happened. The king has need of thee. Everything turns on that. The king has need of thee. And it may be in your life where the king says, now, you've been prepared your whole life. And all of what you've experienced and all the struggles and all the things that went on, and you've been born for such a time as this. And it may be in the beginning, the middle, or the end of your life, and there's something that God has for you. Maybe something small, maybe something big. We don't know. But God is overseeing the whole thing. That's the point. And God prevails. The powers of dark, the gates of hell will not prevail against His church. There may be persecution, there may be threats, there may be all those things, but in the end of the day, He says, I'm going to prevail. And all of this has to do with government. When the Antichrist arises, it has to do with government. And it has to do with this. You submit to these powers, these secular humanist people, and you bow down. And if you don't, we threaten you with something. And it's going to be personally, it's going to be on the Twitter if you do Facebook, it's going to be in the churches and other places. And we have to say, if I perish, I perish. That's the point. Say, if I perish, I perish, but I'm going to do what God called me to do. And it may be a little risky, but I trust God is with it. And in order to do it, I'm going to pray and fast. I'm going to pray and fast that it ultimately is in God's hands and God's overseeing it. Amen? Amen. Let me pray, and then I'm going to ask you something for the video. Father, I ask that you would take this story, Lord, and use it for your glory, Lord, and to encourage people, whoever would view it, Lord. And I commit it to you. In Jesus' name, amen.